I'm going to go through the process in which we ended up beginning our winemaking. And as I go through, I'll end up pausing, and each time we finish one step and we go to the next, and we'll see how this goes. So our first step, we ended up making our juice. The fruit that we ended up using for this was the grape variety known as Valiant, and it is a zone 3 grape. And so the first thing that we did is we took our stainless steel appliances that we were using, and we used Star San in order to sanitize everything and make sure everything was sterile for this process, because you want to try to keep everything as sterile as possible. So we sterilized it, and we ended up using this container first in order to take our grapes, and we cleaned them. And what we did is we took the stems off, and we made sure that we didn't have any undesirable type grape, like nothing that was too ripe and no little small green ones. We just tried using our favorite looking grapes. And then once we ended up finishing, we ended up taking our grapes and we weighed it, because we wanted to make sure we had the appropriate weight for our recipe. Once we ended up weighing it, then we ended up using multiple pots in order to simmer at a very low simmer in order to make our juice. Once the grapes were at a type of consistency where the grape was no longer plump, all the juice was pulled from it, and you could see barely any type of formation of the grape, then we would pour it inside of the sock. That's the nylon sock here. And once we poured it inside there, we ended up taking our primary and we would squeeze the juice and put it into our primary, which we'll go over for the next step. And we used the masher in order to mash up the grapes, and really we didn't need to use this. We used this more for when we were making our jelly. And so once we finished making the juice and put it inside the bucket, we reviewed our recipe. And our recipe that we were using was for the Concord because it was closest to our type of grape. And in our recipe, it ends up showing 6 pounds. We ended up doing around 18. So all of our measurements here for the recipe, we ended up multiplying by 3. Whether it was cups, pounds, teaspoons, anything, we multiplied by 3. Okay, our next step was to take that juice that we were making and putting it inside of our primary. This bucket here is our primary, in which we also cleaned with the Star San. And always make sure you clean everything. And we also have an airlock that we put in the top, and we have our stir stick. And what we did is, once we ended up adding our 2 gallons, our 18 pounds came out to 2 gallons of juice. We added that, then we went to our recipe and we multiplied everything by 3. So for our fresh grapes, we had 18 pounds, we had 15 pounds water, we had 9 3/4 sugar, we added 1.5 teaspoon of the pectin enzyme, which we have here, and then we added 3 teaspoons of the nutrient, which is this right here. And then, because we were actually using grapes that we already own, we did not need to do the Campden. So we skipped that, and because the Campden, actually for the yeast, it will hinder the yeast. That's the reason why, if you do have to use the Campden, that you end up waiting 24 hours. But because we didn't use it, we could go ahead and do our package of wine yeast. And so that was our next step. And so that is where we were once we ended up finishing, and we ended up making sure to have our airlock in the top. Okay, Our next step is going to be where for the next, I have down in my book, the next 5 to 8 days when we have it in the bucket here, and that's a rough guess, we're going to end up using, it's called the Thief, and it's the tube that we put inside the bucket. And once again, make sure that you are using Star San in order to sanitize all of your equipment. And then inside this, once we put it inside the bucket with our wine, it'll automatically draw up our wine inside this tube. And inside our tube, our Thief is going to end up being where we end up putting the hydrometer. And the hydrometer has markings on it, and our goal when we know it's done fermenting is it's going to end up hitting 1.00, and they call that zeroing out. So we just need to check it. We need to stir it every single day and make sure every day you're sanitizing, and then you end up checking with your hydrometer, making sure once it gets to 1.0 and it stabilizes, that it's not changing after that for like a day or two, then you know that your fermentation is done. And so we'll talk about the next step after that. Once we ended up having it that it zeroed out, we reached our top of the fermentation, the next step is to rack. And what racking is taking and transferring your wine batch into your carboy, which is your secondary. And how we do that is we take our siphon, because the whole point of a siphon, some people may or may not use it. We're opting to use it because with the siphon, you end up doing as little oxygen exchange from one to another. And that's key if you want to make sure that your batches are desirable each time without, as many changes. And so we're just trying to do it, the least messy / the least bit of oxygen. And so what we do is we take and go from our primary, we use a siphon inside there, and we go over to our secondary, our carboy. And what we're going to do once it ends up getting transferred into here, we're going to take and put the stopper on it, and then we'll take our airlock and move our airlock in the top part of the cork. And so then we let that sit in the carboy and let everything sediment down into the bottom. And we do that for about 1 week. And after 1 week, we know that the fermentation is done. And then we go and we've then cleaned this with our cleaning solution, which for this bucket is fine if we use the Star San, but I will get one more thing. Okay, this was the cleanser that I was talking about. The cleanser is going to really be important when you're cleaning out the sediment in the bottom of the carboy. Anytime there's sediment, you can't use soap. You really need to use this cleanser in order to clean, but it's going to help clean things better than the Star San that sanitizes it. It works more like a Dawn dish soap type, where it's going to really clean things, get rid of all that grime at the bottom, the sediment. So that is going to be our racking. And this is the siphoner that we've chosen to use. So once we've gone from the bucket over to our carboy for 1 week, then I'll tell you about transferring it back into our clean primary. Okay, for the next step, when we've gone and racked once again from the carboy into our clean bucket that we use the cleaner with, we are going to then let it sit in that bucket and filter down for maybe about a day. Then the next day we'll go and take, and the whole thing is you just want the sediment to come down and you want to clean that carboy. That's really what we're doing here, is we're really making it so that we can clean out that carboy. So once we clean out the carboy and get rid of all the sediment in there, we're going to rack once again using our siphon from the bucket over to the carboy. This time for the carboy, what we're going to end up doing is we first do our 2 powders. And so we're going to do our 2 sulfates, our potassium, not our sulfates, our 2 potassiums, I'm sorry. So this potassium and the potassium sorbate. So these 2 we do right away, and according to the instructions on the packages. And then what we're going to end up doing is we're going to end up adding this packet here. We're going to wait 1 hour. After 1 hour, we're going to add the chitosan. And the reason that we do these 2 clear pouches is we are just speeding up the process in order to get it clear. Because the whole point of this racking is to get our wine batch in the carboy clear. So once you know that it's all sedimented down and it's clear, which we'll let it sit about a week. After a week, we're going to do the same thing, where we're going to end up wanting to get this carboy nice and clean. And so we're going to take and we're going to rack after that 1 week. For our last rack, what we're going to end up doing is going once again from the carboy into our clean bucket that we've used our cleaner with, and each time making sure to move the airlock. When you end up moving and racking, each time you're going to move the airlock along with it. So when we end up moving it into the bucket for our primary, then we are at this stage here. So we're going to put it in the bucket, and that same day we can move it over into the carboy. So once again, we're just trying to get rid of that sediment that's over in the carboy. So you're going to end up taking and racking into the bucket. Once it's in the bucket, you're going to rack back into the clean carboy. Once the carboy, because at that point, because of going back and forth and getting rid of so many sediment, it should be, and the whole point is to make sure it's as clean as possible. And so it should be our beautiful wine. And then because we want to make a sweet wine, we are going to add our conditioner. And what we're going to end up using is we're going to end up taking that thief once again, and we're going to put it down inside the carboy as we pull out a sample, and we can taste it and we can see if it's sweet enough. If it's not sweet enough, we have that wine conditioner behind us. So we add a little bit of wine conditioner to it. Then we'll go back and we'll put this in again and we'll sample it. And making sure throughout all of this, we're constantly sanitizing. Having as clean of a work atmosphere as possible is going to end up making it so that our wine is as close to the same results every time we do it. So we're going to put it down and once again and test it once we've added the conditioner we want, and just keep doing it until it's the desired taste that we would like. This last step, what we're going to end up doing is bottling. And so I have opted to purchase this machine, or aid, whatever you would like to call it, in order to help sanitize. So we use it in order to sanitize our bottles, because once again, you want everything to be as sterile as possible. So we're going to sanitize our bottles. Once our bottles are sanitized, we are going to use a bottling wand, and we're going to put it at the end of our siphon hose, in which that wand will go inside the bottles, as we then rack from our carboy into the bottles with our flavored wine that was to our desire. And then we have this cork press that we end up going, and we'll take our cork and put it inside the top. And then you just pull down the sides, and voila, then your bottle will be corked. And then you will have your batch of wine once you finish bottling all of your wine. Now ours, because we ended up doing the 6 pounds, makes roughly 5 bottles, and because we times everything by 3 because we were doing roughly 18 pounds, therefore we are going to be bottling roughly 15 bottles of wine. I hope you were able to follow this and enjoy our video.